Hey, FFR listeners. If you love getting to listen in on our convos each week, consider helping us keep bringing our signature brand of feminist pop culture analysis to you by joining our Patreon community at patreon.com/femfreak. You can get early access, exclusive bonus episodes, participate in AMAs, join our friendly Discord server, and more. That's patreon.com/femfreak. See you there.
As if like there's this kind of mythic, deraced, path towards power and legitimacy as a man, but whiteness itself and white culture perhaps might be insufficient. But we're not going to talk about the ways in which whiteness might not be sufficient.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined by two promising yellow belts, Carolyn Pettit.
Hey.
And Ebony Adams.
What's up?
In this week's episode, we're going to be discussing the dark comedy, The Art of Self-Defense, and getting into a larger discussion about masculinity. Hello, friends.
Hey.
Hello.
How is everybody?
Good. I'm looking. Our last week's episode was about masculinity and a film. In a lot of ways, it wound up being that. And let's just keep the train going with this week's episode.
That's right. Let's keep talking about men.
Yeah.
Oh God, I love talking about men.
Actually, you know what? That's wrong. I shouldn't say that because the category of masculinity does not end here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just to
whatever.
We'll get into it.
Yeah, good.
We'll get into it. And that's part of what this film, tries to understand. Whatever. We'll get into it.
All right.
I'm the worst. I am the weak link on this podcast.
That is so untrue. You're not the one that gets reviews about how I don't remember anything, so...
Yeah, but that's because people have an axe to grind with you anyway, so of course they're going to give you the business. Who am I? I'm a nobody.
It's fine. All right. The Art of Self-Defense is a new dark comedy by writer-director Riley Stearns, which stars Jesse Eisenberg as Casey, a deeply insecure man living in fear after he's violently attacked on the street. Casey finds a sense of purpose and protection at an unassuming little martial arts school, whose leader, known simply as Sensei, offers Casey not just training as a fighter, but a new way of thinking about himself and the world. All right, so I was the big proponent of talking about this movie. I went in to see it without really knowing what it was, and I have issues with it, but I actually really liked it a lot. There's a lot of little humor in the writing that I thought was really smart. I'm a big fan of kind of almost whimsical add-ins to total straight up reality. So little things like the answering machine
right.
that says it says it's something like you only have one message,
Yeah. So for people who haven't seen the film, I just want to quickly, clarify or establish, at first you may think that this film is kind of straightforward or that it takes place in the quote-unquote real world, but then there are little hints, little things, like the fact that Casey's answering machine says, you have only one message, and it kind of rubs it in a little bit, that clue you in, and it kind of, over the course of the film, that, it's like a slightly comically skewed, version of reality. It's not quite like the quote-unquote real world as we know it.
Yeah. So, and it's very minor, but as the film progresses, you see the okay, so without getting too far into it, when you do meet the sensei, an example of this is this line that even out of context is hilarious. Her being a woman will always keep her from becoming a man.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Those kinds of lines I think are fucking hilarious and totally dead on to the tone of what this movie is trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, so you have Jesse Eisenberg as the central figure, Casey, and Jesse Eisenberg is not an actor who I ever get excited about. I'm never oh hell yeah! Jesse Eisenberg is in this movie. Fuck yeah! I can't wait to see the new Jesse Eisenberg joint.
Poor Jesse.
But having said that, it's he brings such a quivering uncertainty to Casey that is like emblematic of like when I saw Casey and I kind of got a sense of who he was. It's like, oh, I know men like this. The men who sort of feel like aggrieved in some way, like masculinity or patriarchy as it exists doesn't really like work for them. They don't quite fit into it. And as a result, like they probably are on some level like looking for some sense of purpose or meaning or some way to make sense sometimes of like, how do they fit into this world? And I kept thinking about how like I think this film is set, you know, in maybe the, I don't know, late 90s or whatever. The computers are all big and boxy and whatever. Like, it doesn't deal with like the internet or like really like the modern world so much.
The time period doesn't matter, but there are little cues of like, wait a second, what time is this?
Because I kept feeling like, oh, if this were set today, Casey would be the kind of guy that would go on one of those deeply misogynist, like he would find, he, like not out of like malice or hate initially, but just out of like, where do I fit in? It doesn't make sense to me. How do I figure out who I am and how I belong in this world? He might like stumble upon one of those MRA communities.
He'd be on 4chan.
What?
Straight up. He'd be on 4chan.
Or, but specifically,
8chan,
like I'm
whatever.
thinking specifically of those places where what they do is men like upload photos of themselves, and then other men like retouch it and are like, well, here's what here's what an alpha or what a, I don't know, what a, you know, looks like, and this is why women don't like you because you don't have like the strong chin and the like this and that, like that kind of particular insecurity and feeling like some kind of loser, you know, in a way. Like, even though I abhor the misogyny that is at the core of that, like it's not like that I don't understand why patriarchy as it exists leads some men to feel that way, right? Like, and so anyway, like, I thought Jesse Eisenberg is really well cast as Casey in this film.
Jesse gets beat up and then he's really disturbed. And it's a part of this, like, in the narrative, there are violent attacks happening and it's covered in the news and that sort of thing. And so he finds karate, he finds martial arts, and in this space is like different types of masculinity. So the whole movie is dealing with various kinds of masculine identity. And Casey is trying to transform his identity, as Carolyn was saying. So the use of violence and really coming under the wing, or sort of like being under the wing of this guy named Sensei, who is played by Alessandro Nivola fucking perfectly. And he's teaching him about what it means to be a real, quote unquote, real man, right? Real men listen to metal. And so there's a scene where Casey puts on, like in his car, he puts like some random metal album he buys at the store. And he's just like, oh, fuck, what is this? Like, a real man has a big German dog and learns how to speak German instead of learning how to speak French or whatever. I don't remember what he was
French
trying to
is a feminine language.
Exactly.
You know?
And so it is, these sorts of things are used as, like, it's so over the top and absurd, but it very much hones down into this sense of like, here are the rules to be a man. And if you want to be a man, this is how you do it. And Casey is like, okay, I'm going to do these things. And he dives in like full force, and he feels this sense of empowerment being in this space that is he can defend himself. He can both, you know, learning how to defend himself verbally and like in and physically, and it's giving him this confidence that he didn't have before, which is totally fucking made up bullshit. And you know that as the viewer because of the way that the humor and the total lack of subtlety are playing out in this film.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I want to say one thing about the filmmaking in this film that I thought was actually really interesting is, I mean, so there's a fair amount of like, you know, martial arts stuff in this film, you know, at the school. However, you know, I felt that it was interesting that it was all framed in a way, to me anyway, it all came across as a little awkward, a little goofy, and as if the filmmakers were deliberately like not wanting to sort of glorify it or for it in any way to be like exciting action movie stuff. And I thought, I just thought that that's interesting because like you almost have to deliberately, I think, make a choice if you're going to shoot martial arts scenes, you have to like make a choice to actively try not to make it like in any way sort of exciting or glorified or thrilling or whatever. And I felt like this film actually made that choice of like, how do we present this like in a sort of matter of fact kind of way so that the audience doesn't like watch this stuff and think that it's like exciting or anything like that,
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that way as well.
I always find it interesting when we're presented with white men in media who find like some sort of Asian or, Asian adjacent pathway to like a more authentic masculinity, right?
Right,
so like, you know what I'm saying? So like martial arts and like, but the sensei is not himself Asian, like it's still a very white space. It's a white dojo, but as if like there's this kind of mythic deraced, like path towards power and legitimacy as a man, but whiteness itself and white culture perhaps might be insufficient, but we're not going to talk about the ways in which whiteness might not be sufficient. And in fact, we're going to have really racist and kind of problematic assumptions about what it requires to be a man, but we're never, ever going to address those things. And I wanted to say real quick, you mentioned that the film is set in this kind of like, vague, timey-wimey, maybe 90s moment that's not really the 90s. It's not really important. But I wonder if it is important in a way in that a movie like Fight Club comes out in 1999, right? And I think this film seems to be rather explicitly taking on narratives like Fight Club and like because Fight Club, purports to be a satire of toxic masculinity that nevertheless masks its, satirical take so well, or perhaps so poorly that people straight up, sort of bought into the fantasy that was available there. And this film does not offer that in the same way. Like you are left in no doubt that there is something ridiculous and ludicrous about what, sensei and what these people are doing.
What I thought you were going to say about the Asian masculinities thing was that it's amusing that we find like martial arts is like one of the pinnacles of like masculinity when Asian men are desexualized in our society.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Right? Absolutely.
Just pointing that.
Also,
I thought that's what you were going to say.
Well, and the fact that, when you talk, Kara, about how if this film were set explicitly in the present day, then Casey, would have found his way to, some sort of red pill forum or whatever. I think also it's much more likely that he would have found his way to like ultimate fighting or MMA. Right. Because I think there's a way in which as we as a culture have insisted upon this very like deadly, showy masculinity, that like it's almost evolved from the kind of, structure and order offered by martial arts. Like that's not enough, like you have to be even more deadly. And we're going to put together the most sort of like almost beast-like methods of achieving that.
I kind of want to spoil the ending, or like the big twist, so that we can actually dive into the actual parallels to Fight Club and how it really does feel like
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Insert spoiler alert here. It turns out that Sensei takes his night class students and they go out and they beat the shit out of people, and that sometimes they kill them, and that it was them that actually beat up Casey. And so Casey gets promoted to the night class very quickly. They've never had a yellow belt in the night class before, but Sensei's like, you're ready for this. Like, you could use this. And so he learns that was what had happened, and that one of his fellow classmates is the one that actually beat him up. And he finds, and the Sensei is recording these and selling them. And probably it's not said explicitly, but I'm imagining that they're also used as blackmail so that they can't like leave him, right?
No, actually, I think it does explicitly say that in this, because Casey at one point confronts Sensei and says, "You're blackmailing students who left the school long ago to keep making payments." Like, I suspect that that's how that works.
Yeah, totally. So what happens then is that you have, and this is the part that I think is really. So that's the very Fight Clubby, like direct parallel Fight Clubby kind of thing here, except not voluntary necessarily, although some of them enjoy it. But the thing that I think undermines the film, like, and completely undermines all of the attempts to create this kind of satire commentary, is that there's one woman, Anna. And she is the quote that I said at the beginning, her being a woman will always keep her from becoming a man. This Sensei is just super misogynist and will never promote her to black belt, even though she is far better than all the other students. And like another man gets promoted ahead of her and it's not fair and all of this shit. So at the end, when Casey decides like he's going to get his and actually kills the Sensei, he is the one that then passes on the black belt to Anna and lets Anna take over the dojo and like lets her take over the place. And so she gets to be quote unquote in charge, and she has this whole speech about compassion and leading with compassion and integrating that into their practices. But it was a man who had to give that to her. And so this film is a commentary about different types of masculinities, especially hegemonic masculinity. But it doesn't deal with women well and the consequences to women well in a way that I think resolves sincerely, or a way that resolves in a way that I feel good about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I definitely felt like Anna, I mean, all the stuff with Anna, the way it's trying to make that point, to me, it just fell short of following through and doing it like as clearly and effectively as I felt the topic kind of demands, right?
Like, would it have been better to just not include a woman or the consequences on women if they were going to undermine it in that way? You know, like, I believe that there is a space that that filmmakers can use to talk about men, for men, that is critical of masculinity, right? That's not just like every other fucking piece of media. But because they like were trying to show the consequences on women, they only had the one woman who then like was only given power by another man that was way inferior to her. Mm-hmm. I don't know, it just the ending really kind of bothered me.
You know, because I do feel like this film, you know, more so than most, it's grinding and acts like it has a kind of message that it's trying to send, right? I mean, in very I mean, all films have values that are embedded in them in various ways, but this film is a kind of, I don't want to say like morality play or whatever, but it does have very clearly like something on its mind that it is trying to convey to the audience about masculinity and identity, and because it's so clearly trying to do that, and I did feel like the way Anna is handled throughout the film and ultimately in the end of the film almost just kind of confuses things a little bit, rather than clarifying or you know, like I'm just not sure it's clear what people are supposed to take away from that. I mean, and while I often think that ambiguity in a film can be good depending on, but I didn't feel like this, because I felt like this film again is trying to say something explicit in a way that I was left kind of a little befuddled almost by the ending, and when I walked out of the theater, like not quite sure.
It felt a little bit essentialist in some ways to me.
Sure,
in that they were like, oh, the woman, like women leaders are better because they have compassion.
Right.
And like, and not to say in that scenario, yeah, like because she was of a marginalized, very specifically marginalized in this space, that like she might have more compassion for others or whatever. But like, really, is that what we're like? when you're like, I don't know what we're supposed to take away. I think we're supposed to take away that women should be treated better, and they should also be in charge, and they will be in charge better. I mean, and that also bothers me.
Like clearly I think on some level we're supposed to see Sensei's essentialist views through a critical lens, right? Like, for instance, he makes Anna the teacher of the children's class, but not because it's like, oh, she's qualified, etc., as a student of martial arts, but because being a woman, she's naturally more predisposed to doing that well than a man would be, right? And I think we are supposed to see that as a kind of bogus bullshit way of thinking. But then they do it.
But
then the film
they literally do it at the
end.
end.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I think that's where the message it really gets muddied.
One of the things that I'm interested in films of this sort, or any kind of narrative of this sort, is the way that the spectacle of masculinity is done. Like, the performance is for other men, right? So it's almost incidental what women think. But this is men performing for men in ways that, they demand validation from other men. They will either earn it or they will take it. But this is a kind of like narcissistic display that is for a very specific audience. Like, I'm fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by, like the films of like Jean-Claude Van Damme, for instance, or films, where like the whole point is to watch somebody like beat the shit out of like just an endless parade of other dudes, and the ways in which like the assumed and intended audience for those things is clearly like, a straight male audience, but also there is also an audience like within the film of other men watching a man be manly, like I'm fascinated by this shit. And so, the fact that we have like this singular woman who's given access to this space is fascinating on its own level too, because I do wonder, like, in the kind of like, 10 degrees off center reality of this film, how are these men moving through their lives separately or as an aggregate? Like, what does it look like to the women they come across, to the people of color that they come across? Like, I'm fascinated by this, just the way that like white men performing for other white men.
Yeah, and the film, I think one of the most interesting ways the film kind of explores that is at Casey's work. There's like this group of men he sometimes encounters like hanging out in the break room, right? And who like initially early on in the film they just dismiss Casey because he's clearly not like manly enough. And then later, after he spent some time at the martial arts school, he comes in and he talks to them in ways that are much more like forceful and demanding and belittling, right, to some of them. And then one of them is like, do you want to join us? And like, and Casey is like, we should do push-ups or something like that. And the men just sort of like follow suit. Like they just kind of get up like they're being, like they're cattle being led, or whatever. Like they just, and it is this demonstration of masculinity as this kind of hierarchy and this idea of men falling into line behind other men who out, masculinity them as, as the way that they function and operate in the world, right? As if that order is good and just and right, when of course it's complete bullshit.
Yeah, and so what interests me about this is the ways that we see masculinity for what it is, which is a performance and a kind of drag. It's not a quality that, naturally adheres in anyone to the same extent. It's something that you have to learn and you have to accept. And so that is why it it can open up and be available to, non-males or be closed off to them. But the notion of like, gender as performance or gender marker as performance, or, sort of like the notion that like this is only legible, like the masculinity that Sensei and Casey and these other dudes are participating in, it is only legible when it is acknowledged by other men. If this were a situation in which, Casey was surrounded by coworkers who were all women and they were fawning over him, that takes him only so far. It is not until other men acknowledge his power that he is assumed to have achieved something and done it correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it makes you a film like this that is very explicitly about, like, it's very explicitly about masculinity, kind of makes you think about how it's so rare that media ever explicitly identifies gender performance, right? That it often just falls into like this, like the way that this is the way men behave and this is the way women behave and these are the roles that we have accepted as society. And so like, yeah, having, in last week when we talked about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, like the two men leads, like we just accept we just accept their masculinity, right? We just accept that their roles and that how they are portrayed and how they are viewed by the other characters and by the camera is how it is. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a film has to, yes, we just absorb that all the gender performance stuff as just, that's just an aspect of who the character is. That is natural. It is natural, right? It creates a kind of larger cultural narrative of, it is natural that men behave in this way. It is natural that women, by and large, behave in this way, etc. And what we absolutely need is a lot more media that illuminates the ways in which all that gender baggage is culturally constructed and is a kind of performance that that a lot of us engage in unknowingly, unconsciously, or sometimes consciously, deliberately. But no, absolutely. Yeah. I do wish also real quick that I guess I wish that Art of Self-Defense had shown a little bit more how women are often complicit in maintaining, a kind of oppressive notions around masculinity or patriarchy. Like there's a scene at the very beginning where Casey is at some cafe or restaurant, and this asshole guy and his, and woman, this couple come in and they sit like at a nearby table and they kind of talk shit about Casey in French. Right, not knowing that Casey is studying French and probably can sort of understand what they're saying, and I don't know. I just feel like, and this kind of loops in what we were saying earlier about the character of Anna, but this film is so focused on men that I don't know. I just feel like me, there was a missed opportunity there, I guess I would say, to kind of incorporate more about how women can be complicit in maintaining these narratives sometimes.
Totally. Although that did remind me of the quote that we've used in our work sometimes about how...
Oh, in the patriarchy, in the game of patriarchy, women aren't the opposing team, they're the ball.
Yeah.
Which
and
is,
I think that this movie, that Anna is the ball in this, 100%, right? She keeps getting bounced around. So not to dismiss your point, because I think that that's 100% accurate, but I also think that this movie did also show that element of it. And so in some ways you could read the ending as just perpetuating that, although that would be probably giving too much credit to it. I don't think that that's what was happening. One thing, so when we talk about masculinity, right, we're talking about different types of masculinities. There's a lot of feminist work done, academic work done around the different types of masculinity, and I'm forgetting the name of the writer who did a bunch of this, who actually broke down...
R.W. Connell, are you talking about?
Yes,
the book,
yes.
Masculinities? Yeah.
Yeah, so there are all these different kinds of masculinity, and they are kind of ranked, right, in terms of dominance. And one of the things I was thinking about is how, so in this, we are seeing a hegemonic masculinity with Sensei, and then we're seeing a beta sort of style. This isn't their language, but a beta style masculinity in Casey. But I kind of felt like Casey acted very neuroatypical. And I wasn't sure if it was like, I was a little bit worried about this representation because it is never explicitly said. So I'm assuming that's not the case. But I feel like there might be some blurring here between just being neuroatypical and being like quote unquote weird and beta.
Yeah, that hadn't really occurred to me, but I mean, now that you say that, I definitely see that. I definitely see that. Like, I think that my guess is that as far as the filmmakers and the film are concerned, he's just a guy who, again, as I was saying earlier, like doesn't know how, for whom patriarchy and masculinity, doesn't really make sense or doesn't work. It doesn't like provide he doesn't fit in that order in a way that, benefits him. But but like when you think about the way that he talked to his coworkers, the other men in the break room, like it was an inability to understand the social cues and context. Yes,
in a way that is on par with some types of being neuroatypical, right?
Yes.
And more so than just like, I just feel a little bit weird in this space, right?
No, absolutely, yeah.
And there's also like an obsessive compulsiveness with the way that he behaves, where like he can kind of only do one thing at a time, or he becomes really obsessed with the one thing. So yeah. Anyways, I wonder if other people have written about
fascinating. Yeah, that's really fascinating, and it points to a real frustration I have with a lot of our modern media as we get more depictions, like overt and explicit depictions of neuroatypical people. We also get these kind of like fuzzily hinted at representations that we're never quite sure what's going on. And I wish that we could be more overt and explicit about this, because I think there's something really important about, unpacking the ways that folks, from different communities learn and perform masculinity, right? Because there is going to be something different about someone who's neuroatypical, kind of learning the codes and performing the codes of masculinity versus someone who is allistic, right? So the fact that this goes on, that it can be kind of fuzzy and ambiguous, I don't think actually serves the film or the story or the character well.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, that was a movie.
That was a movie.
Like I said at the top, like I think that there's some really, really smart writing in this and really great acting, and I really liked it. I think that there's just like there's some things that I think if you're going to make a movie of this with it, like you're saying, Carol, like a movie about morals, like with a fucking point, that there are some things that maybe needed to get sussed out more clearly or understood a little bit better. But overall, I thought it was cool.
It's an interesting film. It has, and that's my favorite kind of film. It's an interesting film. Even, give me an interesting film. It doesn't quite work usually over a generic, whatever film that's
Stop
fine.
Talking shit about Marvel. God, Carol.
I was actually thinking, like, this is, it's way better, way more interesting than almost any Marvel movie. So hey,
cool. All right, y'all. We'll be right back.
Hey, Feminist Frequency Radio listeners, we'd love to have you join our Patreon community. Hop on over to patreon.com/femfreak. Do it now.
What's your freak out?
Now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. Ebony, what do you got?
My freak out is going to be a link to different small things that people can do if you, like me, are feeling overwhelmed by just fucking horrific injustice, you know? I'm thinking specifically about the ICE raid in Mississippi that just happened a couple of days ago, which is leaving children without parents, without guardians. So you have this ICE raid on this chicken processing plant, hundreds of people rounded up by government thugs, and, you know, on their way to these camps that we're fucking running, and that we are allowing to stand. And I can't take it anymore. I can't look at one more picture of a crying child. You know, I gotta do something. I gotta put my body on the line. But it's overwhelming to think about. And so I've been, you know, trying to do these small things where I call my reps, where I, you know, go to marches, but whatever. The point is I'm going to share some resources that I found with people. So I'm freaking out once again about the fucking state of the world, but I refuse to go quietly into that good night. And I refuse to let any of this be done in my name. So there you go.
Are you linking a thing to us?
I will link you to something. Yes, I will provide the link. It will be in the show notes.
Excellent. All right. Let's change the world. Carol?
All right, so this is like the first time ever I can think of that I basically literally don't have any freak out. I can't think of anything to freak out about whatsoever. So I'll just talk about some nonsense. Lately, a thing I've been doing, you know, or trying to do to make more of an effort to do, is spend a little more time in the sun. Like I tend to be very indoors, you know, I don't spend much time outside. And, you know, but people say like, oh, you know, being in the sun, it's good for your mood or whatever. And so I'm making an effort to, like, you know, obviously taking the right precautions, putting on sunscreen and everything, but like making an effort to spend some time, you know, sitting outside, like, and reading, or just spending some time in the sun every day. You know, given that it's summer, we are having pretty beautiful weather most days here, where I live and everything. And you know, I think I mean, obviously it's different for everyone. Some people hate the sun or whatever, and different how your body physiologically reacts to time in the sun can vary. But I think I am finding for me that spending some time in the sun each day, not a whole lot, but just, you know, some, is actually having some kind of, and it may just be a placebo effect at this point, but, you know, I do feel like maybe it is having some kind of naturally uplifting effect, and is maybe, you know, doing a little something to fend off the depression that I can often kind of fall into. And so, yeah, you know, if it's summer, if you're having beautiful weather where you are, you know, I mean, spend a little time out in the sun and, you know, reading a book. Enjoy it, you know, enjoy the sun. That's my freak out this week.
That's funny. I was going to freak out about nature too. I actually have a freak out, but like I want to second that. And also just like there are so many studies that are done about like being in nature and the mental health benefits of that. So like just going for a walk, if there's any kind of park or woods or beach or sun or anything, has really great effects. Also, like, never mind. Remind me next week to talk about other depressive things. Okay. Well, I was gonna, because I'm thinking about how like sometimes I get really like, oh, I didn't like do all the things I need to do to not be depressed, and then I get more depressed about like not doing it. So like being able to reframe I went out once this week, that's great, as opposed to I only went out once this week. My actual freak out is I watched The Boys. So, you know, let's continue this masculinity train. The Boys is a show on Amazon Prime based on a comic that it ultimately is saying pretty directly, what if the Marvel Cinematic Universe was real? So what if the superheroes were real and they were run by a corporation, and that corporation had immense power? It is deeply cynical in a way that I found really hard, which I always struggle with when I find things too cynical, because, you know, like nobody would ever think, oh, she doesn't like cynical things, but I found it to be way too cynical. And in a way that was so deeply overt. I wanted a little bit more subtlety with it. It's deeply misogyn. Like, it shows misogyny. It shows the costs to women in this space. It shows the entrenches of capitalism, the corporation that runs the major superheroes. They're called the Seven. Are trying to get a military contract to send the Seven as military weapons around the world to stop terrorism, and the ways that they have exploited news media and the public to get that passed in Congress. So some of the stuff I think is actually smart, but a lot of it just feels like, God, why are you hitting us over the head with a fucking sledgehammer? Like, have a little, grace and nuance to this. Like, it can be gritty and dark, but also, like, it feels a little too on the nose. And so then it's also this space where you kind of, like, hate almost all the characters, or you have issue with all the characters. No one is actually, like, good. Even the people who are trying to fight the corporation are not good people, even though one of them is trying to be. So, yeah, overall, I was not a fan, although I did watch it all. And I would probably watch a second season if it came out. So,
Anita, you are amazing to me. You have the strongest ability I know to sit through stuff that you do not like. Like, you constantly are like, God, I hated this. I watched 6 seasons of it.
Yeah,
it's amazing. I love it.
I have the shows that I watch when I just, like, don't care. When I started watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I do not like that show. It's not fucking good. I'm still watching it. I don't know why, but I'm also, like, playing games on my phone while I'm doing it or working or whatever, right? Like, I'm not fully into it. And The Boys was kind of that. Like, I was a little bit curious about it. But also I'm like, okay, well, where is this gonna go? Like, does it get better? Because sometimes the first couple episodes of a show aren't good, which in this case, yeah, like the first episode, I was like, well, this is garbage. So I don't know. I can watch a lot of trash, but I feel like there are little things in shows that can keep you interested or engaged a little bit to see what's next. But yeah, overall, I thought it was not good, and I wish it was different. and the bummer of it is that, like, it is a great concept, right? So I want to see this show exist. I want this critique of capitalism, this critique of superheroes. I don't think this is for me, I don't think this is the right way to do it.
It's got some great people in it.
Elizabeth Shue makes a comeback. I haven't seen her.
Talking about, yeah. But yeah, cool.
I haven't seen her since the 90s.
I was talking more like Carl Urban is in it, right?
Yeah, his character is fucking trash.
Oh man,
sorry
what
to tell
about
you.
Billy Zane?
And his character is not only trash, but he so they keep saying, like, oh wait, the British guy, and I was like, is it a joke that they don't know the difference between, like, an Australian and a British accent? And then I was like, oh my god, no, that is supposed to be a British accent, but it sounds Australian, and it turns out he is actually from New Zealand doing a British accent, but is like some kind of parody of a British accent. It's very confusing.
Well, now I gotta get into it.
Well, let me know how that goes.
Okay.
All right, y'all. Submit your own freak out at feministfrequency.com/freakout. That's FREQOUT. Thanks so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. Stay tuned for the Freakin' After Party, only available to backers of this podcast. You can learn more at patreon.com/femfreak. You can find us everywhere great podcasts are found. If you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review us. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and all the social medias at FemFreak. This show is engineered by Rob Pera. Sarah Norales provides technical support, artwork by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Join us next week for another feminist dive into popular culture. Thanks for listening.
Later.
Bye, champs.